Thank you so much for having me here today. It's a real pleasure to be here at this festival and also be in Chile for the first time. It's wonderful. So today I'm going to talk to you about the Ideas Lab and what we do, but I thought that it would be interesting to begin by talking a little bit about my journey of getting there and my relationship with sound and narrative and also sound and technology, because that's really what got me to the position of leading a lab, and also I think it's most relevant to people here with MediaMorfosis. So my background is that I did a PhD in oral history and global health, and I felt that the real stories that were out there were not living in an archive when I was doing history. They were actually in people's minds and their memories. And so I interviewed a lot of people, and that's why I really focused on oral history. And it was in the process of interviewing people that I just fell in love with interviewing people and hearing their stories. And I didn't feel I needed to write an academic argument about their stories. Instead, I wanted to figure out how can we share the stories that people have themselves. So that's when I started looking into filmmaking and radio, and it was at that point that I really just got into sound and how much you could do with sound to tell a story, and the way in which it really affects your emotions. Many of you just heard from Chris earlier today. I'm sure he was talking about that, but just how much that sound can really do to communicate things and think about time, and also the way in which sound lets you bring in your own imagination, because it's not taking up all of your senses, it's taking up part of your senses, but you're still existing in the world at the same time. So you're hearing the story and the sound, but you're also creating your own kind of narrative around those stories too. And to me, that was really compelling. So I went on to work in radio, and I worked for the BBC, and this is around 2015, 2016. And as many of you know, that was a time when there was lots of really interesting developments happening around technology and storytelling. So a lot of things were happening in virtual reality. So I covered things like around, digital, how the digital world was shaping how people do art, how people were kind of capturing oral histories using AI and holograms. And I was so excited by this whole world, and I started to think about the fact that I was just reporting in radio, which is wonderful and it reaches a lot of people, but we're still using the same medium, and we're still just kind of exporting things into a linear MP3 file, and that there's more that could be done with sound. And at the time, a lot of the immersive experiences were using sound, but it was often an afterthought to the visuals that were happening with virtual reality. And I was also just really thinking about the future of like, what will we be listening to the future, and what could we be listening to? And so I was also doing an audio documentary based on the Camino de Santiago, which is a pilgrimage in the north of Spain. It's a 2,000-year-old pilgrimage. It's a Christian pilgrimage, but now about 200,000 people do it every year for lots of different reasons. And while doing that pilgrimage and recording people's stories, people just opened up in such an emotional way, and I started to think that we shouldn't be allowed to just sit back and hear these people's stories. We should actually be moving ourselves to hear the stories, and what would it do to our relationship of listening if we were moving while we listened? So I also started working with an augmented reality company and exploring what were the potentials there, and also what were the potentials just with our phone, because I was aware there was all these developments happening with headsets and things, but I thought, what about this thing that everyone already owns, and what could it offer us? And I was thinking about the pedometer and the way it knows whether we're moving or not. So I was like, well, could it then tell the story that we're listening to? Like, everyone's now listening to podcasts. Why don't we tie those things together and see what happens if your everyday walk could actually like merge with a story? And so I decided to experiment with these stories that I collected in the Camino de Santiago, and this became Pilgrim, which premiered at IDFA in 2018, and it was one of the first kind of attempts to do a kind of interactive moving podcast, and I'll just play you the video.
We normally walk to get somewhere, but for many, it has a different meaning. The Camino de Santiago is an 800-kilometre walk across the north of Spain. Every year, 200,000 people choose to go on this pilgrimage. If you listen, you can hear these pilgrims walk up, pass by you, and walk away again.
See stuff while I can.
But if you start walking with one, you will stay with them, and they will share their thoughts with you.
I see no shadows, just, it's really hot and it's going uphill, but
I suppose I want to find my can. It was because my wife left me.
Walking becomes a pilgrimage, the walker a pilgrim.
We all knew we were leaving and going different ways, but was it going to be the end?
And so that was a linear clip that you had, but basically the interactions that were happening is that if you went on a walk, and if you kept walking, you'd hear a pilgrim come up behind you, and they would latch onto you, is how we designed it. And then you'd keep walking, and the longer you walk for, they would emotionally open up to you. And if you decided you wanted to stop listening to that person, you'd stop walking, that person would walk away from you in sound, and then you'd hear another pilgrim coming and chatting behind you, and you'd decide if you wanted to listen to them. And if you did, you'd walk with them, otherwise you'd let them go. And we were experimenting with all the ways that this would kind of replicate real life in a way, but the serendipitous nature of life, where you might hear someone, you might meet someone, and you might meet them again, and you might not, and you don't know, and you kind of let them go, walk away from you, and then you might meet them again on that experience. And this project was funded by Bose, and we used the Bose frames, which are pass-through frames. And so you heard the birds and things in the experience, and what we were doing there is we were trying to merge the real world with what you were hearing, and so you would hear birds and you wouldn't quite know whether the birds were actually there or if they were in the experience. And so we wanted you to be kind of confronted with the fact that you are doing your own walk in a pilgrimage, but you're also not on a pilgrimage, and you're in a really busy life, and you're in a city, and you might have to get to a traffic light, and you might have to stop, and then those pilgrims will walk away, and you'll lose them. So it's a way of kind of bringing someone to an experience, but also reminding them that they're not there, in a way. And I'll just talk a bit about how we created the narrative with the flow of the interactive experience. And I wanted to have a journey that represented the pilgrimage, but I didn't want to fall for the classic kind of hero story where you just pick one person's journey and you follow them on that pilgrimage. And so I decided to follow the narrative of the actual pilgrimage itself, which is really you go body, mind, soul. So 1/3 of the pilgrimage, you're just confronted by your body and how you're getting blisters and it's really hurting, and then you kind of transcend that. And then often, in the middle of the walk, people have these kind of breakdowns, and it affects their mind, but then it all kind of comes back together and it reaches their soul towards the end of the pilgrimage. So we broke Pilgrim into 3 different chapters. And so in each chapter, you're following an emotional journey that's part of that arc. And what that meant is that we could make the experience any length we wanted. So you could go on an 8-minute walk, or you could go on a 20-minute walk, and you would still follow this 3-arc structure. And you would have a satisfying story experience, but you could predetermine the length that it was. And so we built it in Unity, and then Pro Tools is how we did the editing. So this picture here on the right is Pro Tools. And it meant that we had to do a lot of really careful editing with the story, because you had to make sure each sentence would end perfectly. and could in theory end, so then Unity could tell the device to kind of shift into the next chapter. But it works in a compelling way, which was an exciting experiment to make a story that could be different lengths. And we also used a form of algorithmic storytelling. So we knew information from Unity, so we knew who people had walked with the most, which was a kind of personal decision they made on their walk, but we knew we could track that information. And so we worked with an illustrator who did these beautiful representations of each of the pilgrims, and we picked a quote that kind of represented each pilgrim. So then when people finished the experience at the end, they were given a card, and it was a kind of personalized card because we knew who they'd walked with, but they didn't really know that it was personalized. So we wanted to kind of play on the fact that we kind of did know information, but that we were personalizing it in a kind of gentle way. And following on from that, I worked with Gabo, and we made a documentary called These Sleepless Nights, which was a mixed reality documentary. And so we used Magic Leap, so that had visuals to it, but we also went really heavily with the audio because that's really important. And These Sleepless Nights is all about evictions in the US. And it's based on a book, an amazing book by Matthew Desmond, who's a Princeton sociologist, who had written all about the complexities of evictions in the US and how, it's such a web of people in really difficult situations, landlords who are trying to make a living from being a landlord, policies, just the whole web together means, unfortunately, families are being evicted all the time, and especially children. And so we really wanted to bring that really to the forefront of the fact that while it's very complicated and there are things going on, at the end of the day, children are still losing their homes. And that impact of losing your home is something that you'd never forget again. And so we worked with The Cube. This premiered at Venice Film Festival, but we again followed a chapter structure, so you walked around the cube and you heard different stories, but you also had to kind of touch the wall in order to hear the stories. And we felt that that would be a compelling way of really having to kind of live and immerse yourself in those stories, and you kind of had to keep listening and touching to really almost play a part in it, because we do all play a part in the system. Well, if you live in America, you play some part and some role in a system that means people are losing their homes. So we wanted to kind of convey that in a way in the experience. And again, use real stories, because I think that's really important, is to get the emotion and the amount you can do through sound of when you actually interview a real person who's gone through it, as opposed to use, a voice actor or anything. So I'll play a clip from that now.
I think an eviction is something that a child will never forget into their adulthood. And there are things in our lives like that that either scar or stay with us forever. And we either channel that in a way that is healing and life-affirming, or it becomes something that, forever scars us and pains us and we struggle through.
Messiah had just turned 4. After we moved from our apartment, there would be times where he would be like, "Mommy, I want to go home. I want to go home." And I would literally hold in my tears because it hurted so bad to hear him say that, and I couldn't do anything about it. He like, "I want to go back to my brick house." And it just really hurt it. And he's like, "What happened? Did they take it away from us? They took our home away." And then he would be walking around telling people, "They took our home away. We don't have no home." And I'm just like, "Mommy, promise, like I'm going to find a way. Like we going to be okay. Like we just need to take a little bit of time, and then Mom's gonna be able to get you like God is gonna help us get a big house, like a bigger house." And he would just be like, "I want to go home." And then that was really hard for me. That was real hard. But that was really hard. That was the hardest part.
So kind of putting those experiences together of doing things which, like a PhD, which reaches maybe 6 people, and then working for the BBC, which reaches 60 million, but then you only have like a week to do it. And then making these more impactful immersive experiences, and also working with academics, so Matthew Desmond with Evicted. I was really thinking, like, what's the future now? Of like, what can you do next? And how can you do these really meaningful stories which move people, but also are funded to get made? And at that point, I was also collaborating with Joe Ali at the Berman Institute, and we were doing a symposium on virtual humans. And I found out that the Berman Institute was going to set up a laboratory to figure out new creative ways of telling stories, but in a university setting, but trying to reach the broad public, which often doesn't happen in a university setting. And so this is in the world of bioethics. So that's what I moved into next. And when you think about what bioethics is, I see it as being really about any kind of story about your life, birth, death, anything kind of affecting your body. So that really affects everyone. And it's all about the decisions that are being made every day about who's going to live, who's going to die, and who gets access to resources, and all these decisions are happening, and it's about bringing more people in to have say over those decisions, or even be aware that these decisions are being made all the time, and who gets to make those decisions, and who gets to say what they are. So that could be around, death, but it could be around reproduction, and the future of reproduction, and how we're going to have children, which blows my mind, the new technologies around that and what that's going to be. And around even more basic decisions around who gets access to healthcare or not. Ultimately, it's a decision around values as well as resources. And so I was tasked with, I got the role of becoming director of the lab, so I was tasked with, okay, what do we do next? How do we create this meaningful lab? And so I decided that it should really be a creative studio and an incubator for these world-class stories. And I wanted to make sure that in everything we did, we were really making them world-class, because there's a lot of universities that produce media, but they're just not reaching people in the right way. So I really saw this, given we had a generous donation to make this lab happen, I was like, then this really needs to be significant and make a difference. And so the way we set it up is, so the lab it's integrated within the Berman Institute of Bioethics. And we really focus on stories and storytelling, and whether that's the lab itself, so we have a team of producers working with the faculty to tell stories in different ways, or whether it's partnerships, because there are already amazing, talented people out there telling stories, so how can we support those people to tell the stories and not just tell them ourselves? And also, it's an educational institution, so we're partnering with, the masters that already exists, and how can we support people who are going through that to become storytellers as well as bioethicists. And then also in the methods of actually doing bioethics, I'm trying to help people change the idea of what it actually means to do bioethics and how you can be more creative in that process. And these are some of the things we've already put out into the world. So Bot Love, we supported a very talented Colombian journalist, Diego Senior and Anna Oakes, to do Bot Love, which is a 8-part narrative series all about artificial intelligence. We've also done a podcast which I hosted called Playing God, and that's all about different ethical dilemmas and personal stories. But this one on the right, this one's in Spanish. It's called Nos Vamos a Casa, and this is an interactive audio tool that's designed. So sometimes we go for big audiences like these podcasts, but sometimes it's all about a really niche, small audience. So in Baltimore, there are a lot of Spanish-speaking parents, and who sometimes have babies who are in intensive care. And there's a real problem in communication with the doctors, because a lot of the doctors in Baltimore don't speak Spanish. So we worked to build a tool that was an audio tool because also at times there's low literacy. So we wanted it to be audio-based, and we worked with a narrator who was a parent, who was a Spanish-speaking parent who'd already gone through this. And we built a tool that meant parents could prepare for going and meeting the doctors to ask questions that they might want to ask about their baby. So it's a bit of a different experience, but it's still very meaningful. But we're also working on bigger kind of immersive projects. So this is one which has been, so we have a fellow, so we have a 2-year fellowship. So Graham Sack is one of our fellows. And this is a 2-year project which is based on Solaris, and it's going to use neurotech to visualize people's brainwaves and use generative AI for the visualization and the sound scores, but it's also going to have a narrative story element. And it will be a live performance where we're really inviting the audience to think about the relationship between planetary intelligence, human intelligence, and artificial intelligence, and where that's going and what that means. And so we're working with neuroscientists, computer scientists, and artists right from the start of the project. So that's exciting. And then this is another one which is working with a pediatrician with children with complex medical needs who come home from hospital. And she was aware that often the doctors have no idea of the lived reality of people's homes and what they go through when a child comes home. So we're doing an immersive audio documentary and a film. And then we're going to create an immersive experience all about what it means when your home also becomes a hospital. And that one will be done for a kind of broad audience, but also we've got the policymakers ready, waiting to see this when it's ready. So it's nice to kind of have the different audiences lined up. And we're very excited to be collaborating here with MediaMorfosis, and that's really in line with what we want to do, which is bring more storytellers to think about these topics, because, and especially being here the past few days, it's so clear how many people care about these issues, and then bringing so much creativity of how to approach these stories. So we love to partner and do that. So we're very, very happy about this partnership. So that's kind of the lab, and this QR code will take you to our website. So if anyone wants to find out more, that's my email address. If anyone wants to stay in touch.
Muchas gracias. I was just thinking, and some stuff you mentioned here, what do you think about the AR or XR of sound, thinking the future of these technologies merging, realities, digital realities with, this reality, if it's still. So how do you see the merge between these, and the daily use, right?
Yeah, that's a really interesting question. I think about that a lot. And I like to think about it almost like a sculpture, that you're sculpting with the outside world when you're making something in AR. And I think there's so much potential with sound to do that, because you can see still, you're really in the world. And also you can do it with your phone. So it's available there for you, and it can become a real kind of, it just feels very natural to make that relationship. I mean, so many people already commute listening to things. It's already happening. So it's just a way of using the new technology to merge with that, because they're both very natural things for people to do.
Yeah, exactly. So I don't know if you have seen this, it's a Netflix show, actually. It's called The Future of Things, The Future of. So they got the future of food, the future of sports, the future of headphones. There is a chapter. I really recommend it. So just a little brief about that. They talk about these AR environments through sound. So how this mix will be related with this mixed reality in sound. So let's say an example, we'll be in a restaurant and we are talking of something, but then there is a very crowded and noisy table beside us. And then with our headphones, we'll be able to manipulate this reality. So as these technologies of immersive audio become object-based, our headphones, today we have noise cancellation, right? So we can get a clearer space of sound with this. But now we can select objects on this sonic landscape, in this soundscape. So we will be able to select, let's say, these people on this table that are pretty noisy and shut them down. So we can manipulate our sonic reality through these devices connected with our headphones, right? So for me, it's something that I always think, like, when you're in a busy place, right? Like, in our rooms, we have, I don't know, curtains to keep our spaces darker or fresher from the light, from the sun. But what about the sound, right? So I've seen some emerging technologies, as this one, like Holoplot implemented in the Sphere in Las Vegas, with this wavefield synthesis, like these sonic beams. You know, as we are talking right now, we can just talk, and I'm talking in English, but then if you move here, then you will listen to me real time in Spanish, and this and this and this, so there are sonic beams, right? How do you think these technologies could be used for storytelling, right? In this, you know, mixed reality environments that we are pretty close to, you know, create this magical illusion of, you know, as you say, we can listen to things in this both frames, but we're also interacting with the reality.
Yeah, I think it's really interesting how you can do it for stories, because I do find often when it's reported on, like you're saying, it's seen in a functional way, and like there's a lot of potential there, but I'm really excited for the stories. So one example was an amazing play I saw at the National Theatre in London called Anna, and they used binaural headphones at the theatre, and it meant that the actors could be kind of talking in a really gentle way, and they could even, it was really moving, they could even kind of go into another room, and you'd still be hearing them, and it felt like this really intimate relationship you're having with the actors, and they weren't having to like propel their voice and that variation by just wearing the binaural headphones. So I think that like made me think, wow, there's so much more you can do there. I think with that's quite a simple technology, and then also just the being able to interact with the audio and change your journey. I mean, I've always thought Imogen Heap is kind of interesting what she does with sound engineering, and she designed these gloves where you can like, so these gloves she has, she can kind of edit her music in sound in real time, but I haven't seen anyone use that in a story, and I think that's really interesting that you can, and especially, you know, thinking more of bioethics or something, but how you could hear different people's perspective of a story, so you can kind of dive into this story world, and through your movement you could you know, or listen to more of like the sound score, and there's so much you could do with archival there as well, of like navigating your way through a journey. But I think the trick is really to focus on how there's that flow and that narrative amongst the journey that you go on.
And through space too, right? Utilizing space through as a narrative element. I would like to know, because I think bioethics is something pretty interesting, like it's urgent nowadays. How do you think this, again, mixed reality environment plus AI, you know, generative AI. So we are manipulating reality with these powerful tools, but how is bioethics concerned about this?
Yeah, that's such an important question, and it's something that they're thinking about a lot in bioethics. But one of the hardest tasks is to be both an ethicist and understand AI, and to be able to create in AI. Like having all those things together is, and that's what we're trying to bring in a way with the lab, because there are definitely concerns around AI, but it's also in the making that you expose a lot of the ethical issues as well. So it's really like, I think it's about those collaborations between ethicists, computer scientists, and creatives, all working together to kind of build things, to be able to ask the questions, because it's already here, you know, with AI. You can't say it's not, so you have to engage with it, but then as anyone, but especially as an ethicist, like how do you engage with that technology to understand it, but also raise the concerns?
Exactly. For me, it's pretty urgent, the fact that AI is already here. We just know the top of the iceberg, right, or what's really happening. So how do you think we as the creative developers should be responsible on the collaboration with AI, creating these new realities in a world full of fake news and democracy is breaking down and stuff? So you in the academic side, you know, with the institute and in your work, what will you recommend to people who's working, developing this new narrative, taking these powerful tools to create? How can we be more conscious about the use of this? Because, as you say, I really like the concept of planetary intelligence. So the whole relationship. Last night we were talking about this kind of consciousness that drive us to, be talking about this and not just playing around with these tools. Because we already know that what happened with social media, right? We didn't have enough time to understand what was happening with the social medias, but now we are there and we have children pretty affected, ourselves too, because there is the development is too fast that our brains and our societies needs more time to understand what's the real impact. But AI is way faster, right? So from the beginning, let's say we're still in the first steps of this artificial baby. How do you think, or how you encourage creatives to take responsibility on this?
I mean, I think they already are in such a great way of even just by making art which exposes the potential in a visual way of what is there. But I think it is about these collaborations, like I say. And it's hard because it's hard to work in AI right now, It's hard to know which is the right tool to use or to get the right budget to use it. But I do think it's the collaborations right from the start that help people, because it's not, I don't really see it as a separation, with the artists and the computer scientists. A lot of the computer scientists are asking the same ethical questions as artists about this, but they are having to make a living in a system. So I think it's really about just bringing people together as much as possible that want to ask these questions and to work together. Because in the project that I put there as the example, we have to do that with computer scientists and neuroscientists. It couldn't be made without their collaboration. But they wouldn't come up with this project without the creative side of it. So it's just really, people just have to get together and collaborate, I think.
Yeah, that's interesting. And also in this case, like you were mentioning, to transform these spaces through sound, like people is in hospitals, right? But with the storytelling, we can manage to get these people to other places, right? So that's a fantastic example on how can we really use these tools, to bring wellness to people that it's in this kind of spaces. What will you think will be the biggest tasks or difficulties you find out to develop this and to connect, for creatives with, the medicine and this side of, professionals? Because on entertainment, we've seen many developments, and for entertainment, I think we're fine. The path is clearer. But then to get into these hospitals and working with institutes like the Johns Hopkins, how do you think is the way we should take the next steps, to collaborate and create these bridges between these areas?
Yeah, I think it is about really setting up the infrastructure, and that's what I've been spending the last 2 years trying to set up, because I think that there can at times be an issue with power dynamics, of those relationships. And I think it's about kind of also having the funds for seed funds for just to experiment together from the start, because otherwise it could become, scientists want to do a project. There is often more resources in the science and medical world than there is in the arts. So really coming up with the conception together. Otherwise, it could be a relationship where you're just not getting the best collaboration and the best partnership. So I think it's about really having small pockets of seed money to just play around together and then find something you both got real buy-in and really believe in this project, and then it will continue as a partnership.
That's a great vision, to start understanding how can we merge again these realities.
Yeah.
Great. So I think it's time to move on. We could be here talking about this for hours, I think. So thank you, Lorraine, for coming out.